Russia says it will do all it can to bring peace and stability to Libya, which has been engulfed by civil war for years. The announcement came as the chief of the Libyan National Army, which is opposed to Libya's internationally recognised government, visited Russia's foreign minister in Moscow.
Our role as peace brokers does not aim at finding a recipe, but at enabling the creation of the best conditions for dialogue between key Libyan figures to allow them to negotiate the future of their own country.
The result of our negotiations is very good. Russia is now thinking about what part it could play in bringing peace to Libya. We will be happy if Russia continues to play a part of this process.
Well, Libya is currently mainly governed by two competing authorities. The UN-backed Government of National Accord has its headquarters in Libya's capital, Tripoli. It controls the western part of the country. And the Tobruk government, whose representative is in Moscow, controls the east of Libya. The political unity of the country was broken in 2011 following anti-government protests. Okay, for more on this, I can speak now to Beirut-based journalist Martin Jay is on the line. Good evening to you, Martin. The meeting then, Sergei Lavrov and a senior representative of the Tobruk governments. Do you see this as a significant step? Will it go any way towards helping unite the situation in Libya?
I think it can do. I think we should be quite positive and upbeat about the step that Mr. Haftar has taken and the Russian initiative. You've got to understand the real problem with Libya is there's been a lack of dialogue for a number of years now. So anything that can kickstart a process and get Mr. Haftar, Mr. Sarraj, the Prime Minister, and their people around the table, which leaves their gun belts behind and puts paper and pencil in front of them, has got to be a step in the right direction. So I think we should be positive about it. But I think in the next few days, a few weeks, it'll be interesting to see if we can move forward and there can be a momentum to these talks.
Do you think, though, we will see the Tripoli-based government actually coming to the negotiating table?
Well, I think they should do. I mean, that would be the sensible thing. You know, the big problem with Libya is that both these warring factions have been influenced by neighbouring Egypt's President Sisi, and they've both been considering for the last couple of years what's happened in Egypt and whether the same principle could be applied in Libya. In other words, if you had enough clout and enough firepower and enough international money, that one side could overthrow the other. And I think that's beginning to run out of steam now, and both sides are beginning to realise that there has to be a third way. So I think for the Western-backed UN government to attend any talks, I think it would be very much a step in the right direction for them. But what would be important, I think what we should look out for, is whether there's going to be any back-channel discussions between Russia and France, because President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has been very much behind doing a similar thing. He's also had talks in the last few weeks with both of these leaders, and I think his side is more or less on the UN-backed Prime Minister. So for these two countries to actually push these people towards the talks, I think that's probably likely, and we should hope that the French will take the initiative to talk to the Russians.
Now, there are, as I understand it, the number of tribal groups in Libya who've been involved in the civil war. I think that number goes into the dozens. Will they be negotiated with? How much of a say will they have?
I can't see that happening in the early days. You know, I mean, I think it's complicated enough. I think the most important thing is to talk to the two main blocs, and the tribal leaders and the various militias that keep switching sides all the time will have to make the decision at some point which side they're going to stick, they're going to back. So I think it's probably too ambitious to actually involve them in the early stage of the talks.
We've been here before in the sense that the UN tried to create a united government in 2015. It failed. What went wrong?
Well, I mean, a lot of things went wrong on the West side. I think you have to go back even further than 2015 and look at the UN mandate of 2011, which was rushed, ill-conceived, over-ambitious, overstepped the marks of what some members of the UN Security Council believed to be what was the final document. I mean, the idea of overthrowing Gaddafi was not part of the game plan, so I think Russia felt very much betrayed by Britain and America and France in how that planned out. But from 2011, what we've seen is the UN and the West pulling back and not really having the courage, the true grit to go ahead and do anything in terms of trying to instigate state building. I mean, there was no intervention of any Western soldiers. The Americans were incredibly naive at the beginning, and they thought that they could possibly build a state overnight simply by organizing elections. The elections were rushed, and as a consequence, and I think at the time a lot of senior figures in Libya warned that if those elections were rushed, a state of civil war would follow. I think that was pretty much the case, and certainly the chaos has followed. So the UN and the West, didn't really go the full 9 yards in Libya, and neither did the EU. I mean, everybody pulled back and didn't really live up to the expectations of the West. So you had this power vacuum and this chaos of two blocks forming, and the militias being employed by both of them. So I think that's really the failure of the UN, was really not to go ahead and actually go ahead with a full mandate. It sort of dipped its toe in the water and decided it was too cold and pulled out. And the chaos of Libya today is the result of that.
Gaddafi said it, if you remove me, you'll have a problem with immigration, and that's what's happened. Do you think a united government will do anything to kind of stop that now and restore some kind of order there?
Well, the immigration issue is an EU issue. I mean, the EU is fabulously incompetent and unable to do anything more than just simply issue press releases when it talks about foreign policy or interventionism. I mean, it's really a bit of a joke, actually. I mean, if you look back just a couple of years, it was very recently Federica Mogherini was talking about getting a UN mandate to actually bomb those people who are dealing in the illegal immigration, the boats leaving the shores of Libya. The EU, we can actually say with some certainty, is responsible for a lot of this mass migration from the centre of Africa. It keeps pumping money into a lot of these dictatorships right across the continent, which forces a lot of people to leave those countries and head towards Libya. So that's not really being addressed head on. And that's just one of the myriad of problems that Libya is facing now. And I think the EU should be probably part of this process. I mean, one of the things the EU does do, even though it doesn't do foreign policy, is it produces an awful lot of money, EU taxpayers' money, for state building. And I think the Russians and the West might consider that as part of this whole discussion, because many of those leaders, and certainly the tribal leaders we mentioned earlier, will be looking at what money can be available for construction of public sector institutions, schools, hospitals, roads, and creating jobs.
Martin, as always, I think we got some fascinating insights from you there. Good to speak to you. Beirut-based journalist Martin Jay. Thank you.